G'day, welcome back to More Cowbell, please. Hey, if you just subscribed in the last week because you listened to Luke Munn's episode, thank you for joining us. So far on the show, we've had engineers, writers, producers, A&R people, executives. So we've had quite a range of roles in the music business. This week, we have a manager. You know how some people just roll out of bed, start singing, and they're a virtuoso. Another kid rolls out of bed, puts his finger on a piano, and a symphony just lights up, played perfectly. Well, Zach's kind of got that skill with managing. He can size a situation up, work out what to do, and just come up with the right answer, navigate situations that look like a train wreck, and rescue them. Zach is the manager for Colton Dixon. He has previously managed Rebecca St. James. Zach has done an amazing job with an act called Skillet. This is an act that has walked the fine balance of crossing over into the mainstream. They've sold most of their units in the mainstream and stayed true to the gospel. Now, next week will probably be part 2 of Zach's episode. The next one I plan after this is a guy called Sean Moffat. Now, Sean Moffat does the same thing as me. We're both mixers. In fact, we have kind of been competitors in the same town. I mean, of course, I'm a much better mixer than he. I'm just kidding. He's an amazing mixer and has done way better than I have in the business. We get into a lot of personal battles, some industry things, burnout. Of course, we're kindred spirits because we've done the same kind of thing. We've experienced the same kind of ups and downs in the music business. Don't forget to subscribe. If you're on Instagram, I'd love it if you'd follow More Cowbell Please podcast. I'm going to be sticking all the reels and things up there. All right, here we go. This is my good friend, Zach Kelm. We are in session, and Zach, I'm super happy to have you. We're old buddies. We are old roommates.
You've forgotten already. It's been so long ago.
No. I cannot forget. It's a very formative period of my life.
Mine
the change
too.
From phase 1 to phase 2.
Right.
Phase 2 is great. I'm going to get you to tell your life story, like how you went from living in Missouri to managing.
I would say it wasn't my choice in the sense that it wasn't a career path I chose. Didn't go to school for it, wasn't looking to be involved in the music business. I actually was a camp counselor. So there's a large group of athletic Christian camps in Southwest Missouri, Northwest Arkansas called Kanakuk camps, and I was a counselor there. So I graduated high school, and I would have been 18.
And you just went straight camp
18,
counseling,
19.
and that was that.
That's right. So I was a student athlete, loved sports, loved discipleship, loved working with kids, and so got introduced to Kanakuk and started working on staff there as a counselor and a coach, a teacher. Then went to Bible college because I planned on then transitioning after college into full-time at that camp. That's really what I planned to do. To be quite frank, it never crossed my mind that there was a whole network of different jobs behind the scenes. I just loved music. My parents had been in a network marketing business kind of the latter half of my teenage years. They ran all kinds of events. So I kind of became really good at details, event planning, VIP type of stuff, being around celebrities and world-renowned speakers and politicians and that kind of thing. That really gave me an edge forward into what I ended up doing in Nashville, because my freshman year in college, they had a position open where they did Christian concerts for kind of the marketing and promotion of the school. It was ran by students. They had a student activities director that was a hired position. That person oversaw a student who ran the concerts committee. Typically, that was an upperclassman, but because I had this background in event planning and doing all the things I'd done with my parents, my name got thrown in, which was a wild story in itself. My wife and I are married today because a girl named Monica Fancher was...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know Monica. So Monica and I went to college together. And I met Monica because she didn't want me to be the concerts chair because she was loyal to the previous concerts chair, who was a senior. But because he was a senior, he was going to graduate halfway through the year. So they had this like conundrum. Do we keep him doing it, or do we have someone else come in? And so I was the someone else, and they had this whole revolt that a freshman shouldn't take over this position. And Monica's one of the leaders of that. So the first time I ever
funny.
met Monica, she marches up to me and she says, "I'm Monica. You will lose." And blah, 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 blah. Literally never met her before, but she's like,
funny.
came in like a bull, like, "You're going to lose. You're crazy for doing this. But hi, I'm Monica Fancher." Well, then I go on to get this position, and she and I become great friends. And years later, she introduces me to my wife. Yeah, so I started running the concerts. I really knew very little about Christian music because where I was from, there wasn't really Christian radio. It was kind of like inspirational. I didn't grow up in that kind of environment or family. So it was a little bit like, okay, I know who some of the bigger acts are because I had become a Christian. I was in a Bible study. And so I knew who some of the bigger national acts were. But those acts I wasn't always going to get at the college because it wasn't big enough. We would get the routing dates between Kansas City and St. Louis if Springfield wasn't open. There was no building avails. So we were getting a lot of A- to B level acts that were coming through routing. Fast forward 4 years, and people keep offering me jobs in Nashville. Kanakuk was really closely aligned with lots of people in Nashville. Lots of songwriters sent their kids. Artists were writing the theme songs for the camp. They would always have a theme for the summer. The director at the camp I was at pulled me aside going into my senior year. And he just said, "I think you're being loyal to a conversation or a set of conversations that we had when you were a freshman. If I'm right, you're going to be doing something else. And if I'm wrong, we'll keep going down the road that we've been going down. But I think you're being loyal to those conversations, and I want to release you from that. I want you to be open to what God might be doing."
So loyal to the conversation of you'd be a camp counselor.
Correct. After I graduated, I would go to work for them. They were expanding their camps, et cetera, et cetera. And he just said, "Hey, you need to pray about this and God's going to show you." But what I'm seeing over the last 3.5 years is that God's like bringing you these opportunities. I had never considered it like that. I was just kind of dead set on this is, I love working with kids. I'm an athlete. I love the camp. And then when he said that, I think God confirmed that in my spirit. So then that last year as a senior, I kind of went into it going, okay, well, maybe I need to consider this. And people just kept saying, "Hey, what are you going to do after college?" That's where I met David Smallbone.
Okay.
The last show I did at the university was Rebecca. David pulled me aside and he says, "What are you doing after college?" I said, "Well, I'm coming in town and I've got a handful of interviews I'm doing." And he said, "Well, come out to the farm. I'd like to see you and talk to you." If I remember, there were a handful of job opportunities I was looking at. I think I could have done any of them. I was talking to booking agencies. I was talking to their managers. I was talking to introductory on a label side. Talked to Darlene Brock, and I spoke about me going out and serving out on the road with Jeff Moore in the Distance. He had like a ministry thing he was doing.
Yeah.
There was a number of those conversations. This was kind of in my mind, not necessarily something I'd considered. So I was kind of open to wherever God would lead me. And I remember I met Dave and Helen out at the farm. No one knew it so much so at that time, but I'm a big outdoorsman and they lived out in the country and it wasn't in the city. And I'm suddenly going, hey, I kind of like this. In the end, what I aligned with is their family ideals and how they approach ministry. That's probably at the end of the day what made me just say no to all the other things I was looking at and talk seriously with David.
Did he call you manager day one, or was that something that came?
Oh my gosh. This is a crazy story. If you've seen the movie, I kind of enter at the end of the movie. Right at the end is where I came in. So their offices were still in their house. It was chaos, dude. You remember what that was like.
Yeah, I
mean, like we're working in 2 bedrooms and there's 20 other people going everywhere at all times.
They never lived alone as their family.
Correct.
There was always a ton of other people.
That's
like
right.
me and you.
Yeah. It was the Australian embassy in Nashville. So I show up, vaguely remember meeting people in the office. I remember meeting Vic and Tim. There was a couple other people there that I met. Jill, I think. But it was so brief. At that point, I'm 21. I'm just trying to get my wits about everything that's happening and figuring it out. So I show up on day one. Nobody is there. David has left me a stack of clearances that he needed for Rebecca's new book. And he just wrote me a note. "Glad you're here. Here's a stack of papers. Here's what I want you to do. Go for it." And that was it.
And your degree in publishing law.
Yeah, exactly. My degree in all the things except this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so I show up and I don't know anyone. The guy who was running the office at that time had left for Australia. We had a guy running promotions. I can't remember what everyone else's positions were, but I didn't know anyone. And I don't think they necessarily were like, why is this young guy just graduated last week here? David or no one was there. So it was wild.
That's hilarious.
It is, yeah.
That completely seems normal.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? At that time, I had no idea. What does this mean that I need to go figure out quotes that Rebecca had used in the book or pictures or clearances? Okay, well, I guess I got to figure this out. And so I did.
You weren't living in a day of YouTube or,
No.
like you had to figure it out in a
Right.
whole different way.
Correct.
Tell me about your journey with Rebecca, how that went.
Her career was really exploding. No matter what structures you have in place, when something like that is happening, it's like the equivalent of something going viral today.
This is just after God's Out.
That's correct.
And that was huge.
And it's taking off. And she's starting to do, headline touring. I mean, she technically already was, because that's how I met her. But it's headed to being a gold record and then beyond. Even the best management companies, when something is happening, it is all hands on deck. It's managing chaos. David was on the road with the family the whole time. And so you come into already chaos. The office is in the house, which is chaotic anyways, because when they're in town, everybody's in town. And then you're just trying to figure out, okay, what do we have to get righted first? If you follow the movie, all of a sudden those things start happening and then the whole thing turns around. Of course, that's where I come into the picture. So David obviously had been in the music business for decades, but now his daughter is well on her way to being a gold-selling artist, and it really starts taking off. So we changed booking agencies. We changed lots of things. We put lots of processes and strategies in place, and it was nuts. It was great, but it was nuts.
David, he's kind of a big picture guy,
Yes,
not a
for
details guy.
Right. The thing for me is that's actually really easy for me. So I would come in the morning and maybe they left out on bus call at midnight and I'd have 10 scribbled notes on my desk.
That's great.
Just ripped off on a piece of paper. It was like this. That never fazed me. I was like, okay, great. What do I need here? All right, let's go. Because I grew up running events and organizing things and setting up strategies and such, that became very natural to just kind of organize the office, get clear lanes of responsibilities of what people were doing and what their expectations were. But you have to understand, I'm 21 going on 22. And then suddenly I become everyone's boss in the office. Yeah, you just don't know what you don't know, but you try to be humble and try to be relational and do the best you can. And we had a great team. We had a lot of fun. It was stressful. We all kind of locked arms. Just like David today, we started self-promoting a lot of dates. We started partnering with radio stations and smaller promoters, not necessarily big national promoters, probably because of David's history there. That brought about a lot of additional work that the management company handled, not necessarily the promoter. It was nuts.
So do you remember moments where you just like the wheels are about to come off, funny things?
Oh, yeah. So the Smallbones had animals everywhere. I think they have more now than they had then.
Way more.
But at the time, they still, I think they had chickens. I don't remember if they had goats yet, and I can't remember if they had a horse yet. Tim Kardashian, who ran promotions for us and would work the promoters, and he had a radio background and such, he could only deal with so much. And, everybody has their own kind of work environment that they need to be the most efficient. And sometimes just the noise really got to Tim. And so one day he was in the next room over. I heard everything in the office slam down. And Tim would get really red in the face when he was frustrated. I mean, what's that cartoon? What was the one with the little boy? And there was always the guy that got
Dennis the Menace.
Yes, Dennis the Menace. Remember the guy that got really red in the face? I stood up because I'm like, what's going on? And I think Tim had slammed his fists on his desk. He was so frustrated. And he's standing at the window, and I'm like, and there's a rooster outside the window crowing, and he just lost it on this rooster. He's like, yeah, and the next thing I know, he's marching out the hall. He goes out the back door, and I'm looking out, and Tim Kardashian is chasing the chickens around the yard. He is so fed up with the noise and the crazy. And literally, I don't remember what he had something. I don't know if he had a notebook, but anyways, I'm watching our promotions manager chasing chickens around the yard, and we're all inside working we're in the city somewhere. Do you remember when the basement used to flood?
Oh, it flooded for years.
And we used to keep stuff down there, and then the boys had like gear and stuff down there. So then it would start pouring rain. Darren would have to like get all of his stuff off the floor because you'd have like inch plus of water coming in the bottom. And then it would come all the way down. It was stuff like that all the time.
By the time I came, you actually had gotten an office on the square.
Ah, that's right. So we moved then. We started managing other acts as well. I think Dave and Dave were managing the Mercy Bell at that point. And then we had other things that we were doing. It was just timed.
You were also managing the LaRue.
We had Andrew.
And when I came, of course, it was when David had an attempt to do a label.
Oh, that's right.
It was called, that was his thing to me to come out and help him work the label. I mean, I had that same thing with you. Go negotiate this publishing deal, right? And he says, here's the deal I want.
Right.
And then I would be in this meeting and the person would look at me and get the red face. I'm like, how dare you ask me that? And I'm like,
I didn't know I was asking anything. Yeah, right.
You know, there's no YouTube to work this stuff out. Dave gave me his idea of what things should look like.
Yeah.
Oh, it was hilarious. And that was the way it was with Dave. You know, he'd just get on and have these big general picture things. And I'm like, okay, what's my budget?
Yeah.
You know, and he'd be like, oh, just do what you have to do.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And you were the guy writing the checks and you're like, why is he spending so much money on this?
Oh, yes. I remember that too.
Yeah. I want you to tell me your story of how you moved on from the Smallbone world. You had managed tours,
right?
You know, album release. You had done everything Rebecca World and with those other artists for all those years.
The whole Smallbone Management thing went from just Rebecca trying to be established as an artist to now 2 gold records in a row, you know, touring internationally, which a lot of CCM artists didn't tour internationally at that time. And then we started signing other acts, started having other successes, and it's crazy. And it's always go, go, go. Never stop. I thought I'd found the woman I was going to marry. I start thinking about the future. David starts thinking about diversifying into other things, elevate. Daniel was doing his book thing. You know, his kids were all doing different companies as well. I don't think he ever necessarily was against managing other artists, but really he only started off managing his daughter and of course now his sons. And so I think he started going, well, what I really would think I should do is do this label. And I really didn't want to do a label. I think I kind of found my groove in management. And so we started having those conversations and I think David was already thinking, I think I just want to manage my daughter. It never crossed my mind that could lead to, okay, well, we're not doing this anymore. What's unique about the Smallbones in one sense is I lived at their house all the way up until like the last year. You're kind of treated as quasi-family. Holidays, birthdays, when they're home, you're having these conversations in a frame of mind that you're kind of part of the family. But in reality, you're not. You don't realize that you're thinking in a way that is not necessarily aligned with the business world. My kids can have all kinds of conversations, but I'm not going to like throw them out as my son or daughter. But technically, I'm just an employee, right? So I think it probably never dawned on me that having these conversations about change, elevate, and some of these other things would ultimately lead to having a lunch with the Smallbones and them saying, hey, we think you need to go do this on your own. That probably would have never crossed my mind. Maybe they saw it more than I did. I don't think that way. You back up years before to the camp director, pulling me aside and saying, hey, you're being loyal, but I think you should be looking here. Maybe that's what Dave and Helen saw. I don't know, but you talk about a shock. One day I'm working for Dave and Helen, and the next day I'm transitioning out, and it wasn't something that I was anticipating. Hey, I think this kid needs to do this on his own. And so within 6 weeks, I started Q Management.
How did you feel when you had to leave the nest?
God had taken me through a lot, but that doesn't mean there weren't scars that were left along the way. Whether that was things that happened in the end of my parents' divorce and how dysfunctional that had become. I didn't follow my father in the business that he hoped that I would do. And so that created a lot of friction and tension. Then you pick up and you move halfway across the country to a new town and you don't know anyone. And this group of people takes you in and they become like family to you. You don't realize what all that does. I also had dated a girl all the way through high school and college. That ended right before I left for Nashville as well. And so you have all of these things that lead to, in some ways, feelings of abandonment or rejection. And I didn't feel that way when I was at the Smallbones, but then all at once, the people that have become your adopted family after maybe not having a family back home and the things that my parents were going through during that season. And then all of a sudden, they weren't saying that they weren't going to be close to me any longer, but those things change, at least in the short term, your reaction to that. At that point, I walked away going, I have no idea what this is going to look like. You know, Dave and I had already started having conversations about Skillet where he would have led them down a praise and worship road. Personally, I didn't think that was necessarily right for them. I thought that they could follow what some other acts had started to do, like POD at that time had just had Alive and Youth of the Nation take off. And I thought that that was the way that Skillet could go. So there was kind of already those, it wasn't friction. I don't actually ever remember disagreeing with David, but there were those different ideals of how something could go. Sometimes when those things don't line up, it inevitably leads to a place that you don't want it to. And we never got to that place, but we were already kind of seeing things differently in how we would approach it. And I think that ultimately led to Dave and Helen saying, hey, I think you're kind of ready to go do this on your own, and it's going to create more friction down the road if we keep doing this. But I was still only 25, 26 at that point. But now it's all on me. There's no paycheck coming in unless I make it happen. I worked for David for all those years. I was known as David's guy. I wasn't my guy. It wasn't my company. You have to take on a completely different mindset in some ways. Some of that I was comfortable with and some of it I wasn't. And I had to grow into that, to be the person that is owning the company, running the company, having employees in the company, and that your artists look to, and not just under the person that your artist looks to.
The buck stop with you.
That's right.
Your choices, whatever the outcome was all on you.
Correct. There is something that changes in a man when he gets married. That provider thing, that and when you have children, it definitely even heightens more when we get married and we have children.
It's called responsibility.
That's exactly right. In a similar way, when you start your own company and that responsibility is on you solely to make the right decisions for your artist, for your employees, for the future, that can be really heavy.
So you're in fear and trepidation. You're starting out your own company, Q Management. How did you tell Skillet?
That was a pretty easy conversation in the sense that John and I were pretty much already talking daily and aligned. When I called him and said, hey, I'm going to start my management company, obviously you don't have to come with me. I think he was pretty much like, yeah, I'm going to come with you. John already was thinking the same way I was as far as where he wanted to take Skillet in the long term. He just didn't have the help to do it. At the time, they hadn't sold 100,000 albums. They weren't making $2,500 a show yet when we started working with them. You go from a paycheck to your straight commission, and everyone in the industry would not have bet that Skillet was going to be the artist that won. They would have been the side artist that might have a tinge of a career for a few years. And now here they are.
It's definitely remarkable.
It's unbelievable. I mean, and honestly, that doesn't happen without the work of the Holy Spirit opening and closing the right doors for them through the years, because you can't manufacture that level of connection and success, particularly when you look at how fringe of music they were in the whole of the CCM industry.
Especially at the time.
Correct.
And they've had connection outside of CCM land.
Correct. And at the end of the day, that is what's kept their longevity, is that their relational equity that they build in the mainstream rock scene with other artists and promoters and such has carried them well beyond just a radio.
Tell me stories about the milestones, that those moments where you saw a result from something Skillet did, where you're like, they had this song crossover, or sales numbers came in and you're like, oh my gosh.
The very first milestone was a producer named Paul Ebersold, who had done a bit with Ardent in years past, but he had a big record with Three Doors Down, Kryptonite, and all that was Paul. I feel like he had worked with John in the past just a little bit, but not in the same kind of mentality of, we want to go find a mainstream partner that can cross this. We start Q. John Corey and I start talking about what that's going to look like. And our first thought is, okay, we've got to find someone with some credibility that's making mainstream rock music. And so we went to Paul. Thankfully, Paul was like, yes, let's do this. So when they first cut the song Savior, I remember being there and I was like, okay, we're on to something here. And of course, that was the first song that really got everyone's attention on the mainstream side. And within a couple months, we were starting to send music out to A&R folks, and Atlantic called, and then Universal called, Interscope called, Lava called, and Sony called.
So they weren't on a label at that point?
They were on Ardent.
They were on Ardent.
That's right.
Okay.
And I convinced John Fry, who owned Ardent, he was going to make a whole lot more money if he allowed me to go find a mainstream partner and sell those mainstream rights than he was having a small distribution piece in the CCM world. I think he didn't believe that we could do it. Okay, haha, young man, yeah, you go for it. I'll throw you a bone, but this will never happen. And he actually almost sabotaged it a couple times. I remember talking with Avery and Monty Lipman. I remember talking with Will Botwin and Marshall Altman at Sony. I remember talking with the folks at Atlantic. And some of these people had kind of been circling a little bit around Skillet before then, because they were kind of doing something that seemed outside of the Christian, nucleus of AC and worship acts. It never would quite land because it was too Christian. And then, of course, POD takes off. People start looking, going, hey, maybe there's something more here. In the process of getting signed to Lava, which was Jason Flom, Andy Karp, Lee Trink, they were distributed through Warner Atlantic at the time, but they hadn't been folded into Atlantic. And so we went up to New York. We did the club thing. We played for, a bunch of labels. And we felt super at home with Jason and Andy in particular. And so we're going down this road along with now Skillet's attorney, who's been their attorney for 20 plus years, Todd Rubenstein, who is awesome. Hey, Todd. It was just like the perfect group of people to come together at the perfect time for a band that no one believed could actually make something happen. I mean, literally, it was kind of like the laughing, like, yeah, Skillet, that's the name of your band. We had a deal in place with Lava, which at that time had Matchbox 20, had Kid Rock. They were hitting diamond status on Kid Rock at that point. So they had Simple Plan. Things were happening. We had a deal in place, and it was coming into fourth quarter of 2004. John Fry at that point starts panicking a little bit because he didn't think that this would happen. Paul had already produced the record. Of course, Ardent made you produce the records there. The deal was about to be signed, but they were supposed to hold out any mainstream CD sales, and they were only allowed to release into the Christian market because they were going to keep the Christian market. Well, John Fry got cute, and he decided that he could slip in 15,000 CDs to Walmart, thinking that the deal would get signed, and then it would be discovered later. Instead, somebody from a reporting standpoint, probably a regional, called Jason Flom and said, there's 15,000 units in Walmart, which was in violation of the deal that was literally being inked. And so all of a sudden I get a call from Andy Karp, who was running A&R for the label. And he's like, what in the world is going on? We've just found out you guys have put in 15,000 units into Walmart. Jason's saying that we're going to pull out of this deal. You talk about stressful. I mean, we basically had passed on the other opportunities. We had cut off the conversations with the other labels. We decided that Lava is where we wanted to be. We're about to sign the deal. And then our imprint puts in units trying to get a cash grab. It literally almost killed the deal. And on top of that, the guy managing POD was close with Jason Flom and everybody there because it had blown up for them. The story is told, Jason was out on the golf course with this manager telling Flom that Skillet would never make it. Why was he signing this act? So you've got John Fry putting units into Walmart in violation of the deal that's literally about to be inked. It's amongst the attorneys at the time. And a prominent manager managing a multi-platinum act that's blown up for Warner at that time saying, hey, I know these guys. You shouldn't sign those guys. And it almost killed the deal. Oh, it was so stressful. Luckily, Andy believed, Todd, our attorney, they were all close. They had done a number of deals together. and we were able to salvage it. We cut the song Open Wounds to put on a deluxe edition and put that out. And while Open Wounds, from a charting position, didn't run up the charts and do something amazing, it opened the doors. And
what happened to those? Those 15,000 CDs were in Walmart. There was nothing you could do about it.
Nothing you could do about it. They were out. It was done.
The gate was open. The walls had left.
That's correct. There was no getting that back. And it literally almost wrecked.
So you
the
still
deal.
made it work anyway, despite the headwinds and the odds. So the record goes out, and then where's the moment where the label's like, okay, this was a good deal?
It was the next record. It was Comatose. We started working with another producer, a guy by the name of Brian Howes. He was a young rock producer who was having a big hit with the group Hinder. He had been in the Nickelback camp with Joey and those guys. Chief was managing Hinder. They were all kind of connected. He had the big Lips of an Angel smash with them. We get introduced to Brian through Andy, who thought that Brian would really make sense for Skillet. And I remember being in the studio in Chicago with Brian as he was cutting that stuff. It was just magical. I mean, you could just tell that they were creating something special. When they were writing the lyrics for the song Rebirthing last night, you go down the road. That was the pivotal moment. That record was the one that then took off. That record starts to take off. John was all about, he loved Kiss, he loved Metallica, he loved all these big artists with massive production. So they weren't quite a headliner yet, but the record was taking off. Atlantic was working, Whispers in the Dark first, and then Rebirthing or Last Night. I don't recall at this point, it's too long ago. But regardless, the festivals in the Christian market were massive at that time. This kind of a shell of themselves now. There was one production manager that ran most of the big festivals. He kind of managed with an iron fist, but he was a super nice guy. I mean, what's so funny is guy's name was Denny Keatsman. He was like a big teddy bear, but you had to get past the veneer of authority. At the time, there was an old school mentality that if you weren't the headliner, you didn't bring any production. The record was taking off. John wanted to start creating a show. The festival promoters wanted us to create a show because they wanted new headliners, but we weren't the headliner. Or if it was Newsboys or if it was Toby, or without Denny necessarily knowing, all the festival promoters had agreed to this big rider that we were going to do, which was the lifts and the pyro and all the stuff that has become synonymous with Skillet at this point. But it was like the first summer that we were going to kind of roll this production out. So Denny finds out that we're planning on playing a headlining set, but are in the next to closing slot. And he has this huge fit. I get it at this point. I understand like that created a huge headache for him. I had convinced all the promoters that we would be self-contained. Whatever it took to get us on in our allotted time, on and off, changeover, whatever that was, we would staff up to the point that we would make that happen. And we were committed to that. Didn't matter to Denny. Denny's like, you're not the headliner. You're not going to do this. So Denny sent out an email to the whole CFA, basically calling us out. And he put out all of his positions as to why Skillet should not be allowed within the CFA to put on a headlining set if they're not the headline. Without even thinking, I did think, obviously, I hit a reply all. Which was a huge risk.
That was a brave one.
I've only had my own company for a handful of years at that point. It's now 2006. I started in 2002. The guy who's running the production for all the festivals sends to all the major festivals, Alive, Creation, Cornerstone, Agape, across the board. It was a massive list. And he was basically just saying, this is not going to happen, and calling us out. And I hit reply all. I obviously tried to write a compelling argument, but that was a huge risk to take that reply all mentality and put it out there for everyone to see.
So you draft your thing, and then your mouse is hovering over the send button.
Yes. And I send it out. I am just going up against the quintessential guy who could squash me in a moment. But as God would have it, I should say, everyone was like, yes, we still want you to do this. Graciously, Denny came back and said, okay, I'm going to hold you to your word. You're going to make sure that these changeovers are within time, or I'm cutting it. And man, he was on us too. But to our crews, they got done what they said they would get done. It was not easy. We had to really staff up to make sure and get it done. But it was a huge moment, because at that time, if Denny would have said no, and all the CFA promoters would have said, sorry, Zach, I know we agreed to this, but we're not going to allow you to do it, the show that we are now known for that was the infancy of it. That was where we rolled it out. That just catapulted the band from that point forward because they became known for this massive show and they weren't even the headliner yet. So then by the time they became the headliner, of course, then it became even that much larger. It was a big moment.
What makes music Christian music?
I mean, obviously the person writing it has to be a believer to begin with. You can't always take that at face value. There are artists that work in the fringes of Christian music that they're using it as a marketing and promotional tool to get where they want. But ultimately that music has to be rooted in scripture and rooted in a faith that is personal and you're walking your life out in that way. So to me, Christian music would be music that comes from a place of faith, comes from a person who has a personal faith and is scripture based.
What I'm hearing you say is it's lyric related. It's got nothing to do with genre or anything like that.
The lyrics can't be devoid of the lifestyle or the personal choices of the artist. They can't live a life that's not synonymous with walking out the obedience and scriptures that Jesus gave us.
That's really good. I like that. Okay, next is Skillet and Crossing Over. How have they been successful in a mainstream world and not being compromised?
They have not been compromised. We were very strategic in the early days how we did it. And that obviously paid off for us and how we would do the Christian market and how we do the mainstream market. They're working in the alternative and active rock market, which is a niche genre in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're such great musicians, they have such a great live show, they're authentic. When you're around them, they don't feel like people with egos and people trying to put themselves up against everyone else in the room. So they would just win with other acts. They would win within the label. They would win with radio station promoters and such. And relationally, people would give them the benefit of the doubt because they would leave on, I really enjoyed having those artists in. Of course, the music has to speak for itself. None of this would have ever happened if they didn't have songs that would enable them to cross genres, in which they did. And at that time, rock was at top 40, was at Hot AC. And so they were able to tap into those years where rock music prior to hip hop and R&B kind of taking over the formats. And it was at the height of what culture was listening to. There's been lots of artists that have wanted to cross over even during those years. They just didn't have the songs or they didn't have the live performance. There is a misnomer, I think, about Skillet in the sense that people would see the pyro and the lifts and the staging and they would go, well, if I could just have those things, I would be successful. No, you have to have hit songs. If you don't have hit songs, you can dress it up as much as you want, and that's not going to matter. It'll be exciting for the whoever comes, but that's not going to exponentially change your career.
Yeah, people aren't going to connect to the music unless they love the songs. You're the manager. Stat me for a second. Like, what are their standout stats? You said their sales levels in the 20 millions or something.
Yeah, so they've sold 24 million albums, multi-billion streaming artist. They tour globally, all over the world. Their touring outside of the U.S. is pretty much all general market. All general market promoters, mainstream rooms. And then in the U.S., we can play both markets.
So they've done some tours opening for some big secular...
Or co-billing with big secular
co-billing?
artists. Yeah, like we just finished 3 tours in a row with Spring and a Fall with a band called Theory of a Dead Man and Saint Asonia. And then we did a co-bill tour with the band Seether. And both of those artists still do really well on the active rock format. We've played with Creed, we've played with Korn, we've played with Nickelback, we've played with Shinedown. I mean, you can just go down the road. We've played with Slipknot and Stone Sour, which is Corey. We've done tours with lots of general market artists. On the mainstream rock market, they've had 10 plus top 10 mainstream rock hits, 5 number ones.
5 number ones, mainstream rock chart.
Yeah.
Cool. I wonder if you can tell me, who are you going to manage and who are you not? Because obviously you've had that success. Other people are coming out of the woodwork and going, manage me, manage me.
Yeah. I mean, I think because I didn't choose this in the sense of this wasn't like I went to Belmont and went and got a music business degree.
Right.
And this was what I wanted to do from, the time I was a teenager on. I've always looked at this like, okay, this is what God called me to do. I actually love it. I love the creative process. I wasn't necessarily a creative person. I was a logistical person in the beginning. Now I'm much more involved in the creative process, but I still obviously do the logistical side too. I love songs. I love getting in and making sure that we're trying to bring the best songs that we can. I've been approached about different artists through the years. Unless we have a faith component to how we live our lives, that's not an artist that I will manage, which certainly can, particularly when you have success and you're in a mainstream rock genre. I've been approached by lots of mainstream rock artists. It's hard enough to manage artists and manage yourself. We all have our own things that we have to continue to bring before God and work on. Imagine not having God or the Holy Spirit in your life to help you convict you or navigate or make decisions. Yep. And so I decided early on that I didn't want to manage artists that weren't believers themselves. Now, what I really enjoy, what I've always thrived on, is finding artists, whether they were a believer and wanted to be in Christian music or they were a believer and wanted to be in mainstream music. I love that. I feel like that's been part of what I enjoy the most, is crossing music outside of just the Christian, genre. And I don't have anything against the Christian genre. I just think that from a cultural standpoint and from a evangelical standpoint, taking Christian music, which is life-changing, into a world that is looking for hope and looking for answers, that it just brings life. And we've seen that. When we go to other countries, like particularly communist countries or countries that don't have the same freedoms that we have in America, Skillet's always been known for bringing anthemic, hopeful songs. You can see what this music means to people that you're living under oppressive regimes or communist regimes. Or
what countries have they been to?
Russia, all the South American countries, some of the more Baltic state. They just played Turkey, played Dubai. To be a Christian in those cultures can be even dangerous. And so when Skillet is able to go and play in those environments, you can just see how much this music means to those fans.
That's incredible.
It is. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely incredible.
Look on YouTube, look at Moscow before the war. There'd be 8,000 people. It's just amazing. Or Brazil, like Venezuela. These countries are run, under somewhat dictatorships and such, and it's feast or famine. Skillet's music has spoken to that disenfranchised person or that oppressed person, but it's always brought hope, not despair. And so you see that when people come.
All right, next week with Zach, we're going to get into Colton Dixon, some of the other things he's been doing, things that he's navigated. Some fascinating stuff in the back half of this episode as well. So I hope you'll tune in. There'll at least be an episode next week. Maybe I'll get a bonus in if I find the time to get the stuff edited. Don't forget to subscribe. Go over there now and hit that button. All right. I hope you have a great week and that everything that goes in your ear holes is awesome. Till then.